Brent, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where in the country you are today. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, to be really having a conversation with you about what's been so exciting for me, something that's actually been pretty unexpected for me in the last year in terms of the interest with Farm 365 and the interest with just what's happening, on farms today. I think, one of the big messages, one of the big lessons learned over the past year is that consumers are genuinely interested in where their food comes from, in how it's produced, in what farms look like today. And we as an industry, especially as farmers, we have a pretty big role to play in terms of communicating that message and really just having these conversations with the consumer. So it's really exciting to be with you today, and I do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to join me. As Brent mentioned, we'll do some question and answer kind of towards the end, so please don't hesitate to ask anything and everything in that question and answer box as you think of them, and then we'll get to them towards the end. So really, in terms of where advocacy comes for me, comes for me is, I've got a communications background, obviously grew up on the dairy and grain farm where my wife and I and our kids now are in the succession plan process of taking it over from my parents. And when I came back to the farm after that, stint in journalism, realized that a lot of my friends and a lot of other consumers were interested in what was happening on a farm, but where were they going for that information? And that was really one of the big challenges for both us in an industry and the consumer, is there really wasn't any type of bridge there. If there was a bridge, it was Google. And, if you do any kind of search through Google, you know that sometimes you get the information you want when you search. Sometimes you don't get the information you want. And I think, when you start searching things about agriculture, especially about technology use in agriculture, especially about animal welfare and animal care in agriculture, we certainly have a big, big challenge as an industry going forward, in that when you do those searches, unless it's in the top 10 on that first page of Google, I fall victim to the same thing, that if it's not in that first page, it might as well not exist on Google, because there's no way I'm going to click, to page 2 or 3 or 4, and consumers are the same way. So when they do a search, probably from a place of genuine interest in agriculture, they're finding information that really is not helpful for the industry. In a lot of cases, may not be true about the industry, but has been generated by a group of people that are determined to change the conversation about food to a very negative one, to a very fearful one, when really I think, in agriculture and in food, we're in a pretty positive place today. So I think, notwithstanding the complexities of the system and the challenges going forward as, the population grows and urban sprawl happens and things like that, I think we do have a really positive story. So when I talk about advocacy, a lot of it comes from a place of, we as an industry have to be present in the online conversation, because when people are looking for the information, they're going to go online, they're going to use something like Google, they're going to use social media, and if we're not there in that space presenting our side of the story, then to the consumer, our side of the story doesn't even exist. And we really cannot afford to let that continue to happen. So that's really where, I found an interest in advocacy. And over the last number of years, I've been taking various photos. Here's ones over the past probably 3 or 4 years that I've taken just around the farm, because I find it quite fascinating and quite interesting to be able to, take pictures as I work away on, that daily life around the farm, and share what is happening on the farm with consumers. It's just been an interest of mine. And as we move forward, I want you to think, what are your interests? What are your hobbies? How can you use those interests and hobbies to put that positive message of agriculture to work, whether it be in the online space or whether it be in other spaces? We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on towards the end. But as we are talking and as we are having this conversation, I do want you to be, having a thought of what can I do going forward. So with that in mind, one of the challenges that I always wanted to, try to address was, can I be more engaged? Can I, be even more active than I already was, posting, a picture or two a week? Can I do something a little more regular? And certainly, another advocate that you may be familiar with is Sarah Schultz, based in southern Alberta. She, in 2014, took on a challenge of taking a photo every day of her two young boys, and kind of them growing up, and her husband, and around the farm and things like that. And it really fit well with her blog and her message, in that, for lack of a better term, that mommy blogger space, that she has a lot of conversations with fellow mothers, about raising kids, and, all the good and bad that goes with that. So when I saw her take those pictures throughout 2014, as I was trying to come up with what my new challenge for 2015 would be for myself, I thought there actually could be, a pretty neat opportunity going forward, that could I, in fact, take a picture every day in 2015, with a focus on what we were doing, mostly around the farm, but, also as farmers, as primary producers, what else goes into, kind of that daily life, whether it be, heading off to an input supplier, whether it be heading off to a meeting, things like that. But certainly the big focus was going to be on, what it would look like to be on the farm, working around, on a daily basis. In that, between Christmas and New Year's of 2014, almost a year ago now, I sent out just a simple tweet that said, here I was thinking of taking up this challenge. I would use the hashtag farm365, to kind of highlight what was going on our farm, year round. And it was really just, kind of to let my current followers at the time know that this was something I was thinking about. To my surprise, the media actually got a hold of me fairly quickly after that first tweet. If I remember correctly, probably, 3 or 4 hours after that initial tweet, I got a call from our local CBC radio station, curious about doing a quick interview, kind of going into New Year's Eve, about what I was doing, why I was doing it, things like that. And I'd had conversations with them before, so thought that was, quite interesting. But it didn't take very long for that story to move its way up to, the CBC national desk online. And then, once that hit online, then certainly, several other media outlets followed suit, whether it was CTV, whether it was the London Free Press here, the local daily paper. They came out and did a front page article on it as well. Just fascinating to me that, not only were my followers interested in me taking part in this challenge, but also, the general public. And to my surprise, once that story broke, I was to, 6,000 or 7,000 followers going into this challenge. Really overnight, I went up to, probably 12,000 followers. Just absolutely stunning to me to know that consumers were, as I'd hoped and as I always wanted them to be, consumers were genuinely interested in what was happening on farms today. And so, that really gave me a boost in saying, okay, this advocate message that we've been trying to push through the industry actually can have a really positive impact. Of course, what terrified me is that now all of a sudden, there were a lot of people watching, and it really turned into, a challenge for me, that this was something that I wanted to do and something that I was going to follow through, throughout 2015. So it was a pretty exciting opportunity. Now, as we do go through my story, I also want to just kind of, take pause breaks through this process and give you an idea on some of the lessons that I've learned, both through this process and through past processes, whether it be in the media field. As we said, dealing with media is one thing that, as an industry, some of us, try to do that as well as we can. Others, maybe want to take advantage of that. And certainly these are a few of my points when we talk about dealing with the media, that I think if you're new to that process, you have to try to keep in mind. So, one thing with dealing with the media to keep in mind is that, in a lot of cases, sometimes a reporter may call you and you will never hear from them again. And that certainly happens, but in probably a lot more cases, certainly in my experience being on both the reporting side and the, getting the question side, it's much more of a relationship process. When reporters are looking for information about agriculture, can you be, the local voice or the voice, within your particular sector on, any one issue? I think when we talk about relationships, though, one thing to keep in mind is it is a give and take relationship in that. Certainly I've had a lot of, positive media stories come out through this Farm 365 early on in the year. Since then, I've heard from actually a few of the reporters when we start getting into some tougher issues, when we start dealing with, things like trade talks, with things like animal care, things like that, they're still calling. And so even though, all we ever want is good news stories, unfortunately, there's bad news stories too. And I think that, when we talk about relationships with the media, it's important to remember that we really should be prepared. And I hope that if you want to deal with the media, you need to be prepared to be able to answer even those tough questions when they come along, because it really is, a give and take relationship. The other thing to remember, with any reporter is, timelines and deadlines really are life and death for these, for reporters. I remember in, my reporting days a number of years ago, I had to be on the radio at a set time. So, at 8:30 in the morning, whether I had a report ready or not, I had a block of time that I had to fill. And so my deadline, I had to meet it, or else it would be dead air. And, obviously, there would be some pretty tough consequences with that. The same goes with your 6 o'clock evening news. The same goes for space pulled out, in a newspaper. So when a reporter calls you, and I know in the industry, especially, fall and winter time, we do get into that process of putting our heads down and working hard and just trying to get the crop in or crop off or whatever that is. The reality is a journalist's deadline could be that afternoon, could be that evening. Maybe it's next week too, but without returning that call, you're not going to know. So it is important to, respect that they're probably dealing with a tight timeline. And if you want to have that relationship, you're going to have to respect that and be able to return their call within a couple of hours, at least to find out what information they're looking for, what kind of questions they'd like to ask, what's the topic, things like that. Certainly for me, one of the things that I always like to do is once I know what they want to talk about, I like to, thank them for that, and then say, if we could, have a conversation in another hour or two. That gives me time to make sure I'm comfortable with the topic, that I'm comfortable with what types of questions might come up, that, it's not a complete surprise, when they do start asking questions. So I think it is important to take that time and, even if it is an hour or two, to be able to kind of digest that information and get a better idea of what you're going to talk about and what your key messages are. Your marketing body, your industry association, can be a big help in that. And certainly I fall on, various industry associations here in the province and in Canada, on a fairly regular basis, just to make sure that, I'm fully aware of all the current issues that are happening and, aware for what types of questions and issues may come up. So just a few notes with dealing with the media that I think is important. Not everybody needs to be comfortable with dealing with the media. If you get a call from the media and you're not comfortable with it, if you aren't, that's fine. Certainly, I think it's probably helpful if you help that reporter or that journalist find another resource, and maybe it's simply pointing them to your industry association. But this isn't a case of, this is for everybody. If you're comfortable, great. If you're not, then don't feel that you have to on behalf of the industry. One note as we are going through this process that I do want to mention, obviously our hashtag for the campaign that I've been working through is Farm365, and I know a lot of farmers are doing that, but if you do want to tweet or Facebook message or Instagram or whatever it is you are working through social media, by all means use the hashtag AdvocateWebinar. That's all one word, AdvocateWebinar. If you are talking, and then we can kind of find each other in those conversations online. So, dealing with the media, obviously that was quite a busy process through, December 30th to probably about January the 3rd was the first big run of social media. One of the biggest questions that I got regularly going into, January 1st, especially that December 30th, 31st, was, what's your first question? What's your first picture going to be about? Well, this was kind of an idea that I thought would be kind of a neat challenge. I actually hadn't really thought that hard about what the first picture was going to be. And now that there was all of this attention, I almost started feeling pressured that first picture should, really mean something, should be meaningful to me, to the consumer, kind of to everything. And, that all of a sudden, kind of made things quite challenging. So one of the suggestions I got a couple of times from certainly both media and people within the sector was, well, take a picture of a newborn baby calf. Well, that's all well and good, but, the challenge is, we're a herd milking, between 50 and 60 cows here in Ontario. We don't have calves every day. And I kind of, thought, well, there wasn't really much of a chance that we'd have a calf that day. However, as luck would have it, or as fate, or whatever you want to call it, sure enough, at about 2 in the morning, first thing January the 1st, here, Birdie the cow and Happy the calf, were kind of the highlight of that first, picture. And really, I thought was kind of a neat way to start off the campaign. And, as we got going on, then obviously, there was a little bit more of a process through my head in terms of, okay, what else do we want to cover, from the dairy farm as an industry? What are some of those issues that we want to cover? So, once we got the first few out of the way, then the pressure started to relieve a little bit in terms of what that should be. And, I realized that there really doesn't have to be anything specific on a daily basis. It really is just, what are we doing on the farm that day? What are we focusing on? What are things that are happening around the farm on a daily basis? It's a place that, we're always doing something, even if it is just, the regular feeding, milking, bedding, we're still doing it on a daily basis. So it provided a pretty easy opportunity to, find content around the farm once you started, really looking for it and really, having an eye for what that next picture might be. But then after that first picture, that was day 1. Day 2, I think, was my alarm clock, that I get out of bed at 4:45 every morning. So that was picture number 2. And then January 3rd came around, and all of a sudden there was, a trend that was really starting online, especially on Twitter, from an activist community. And these are the activists that we were talking about in the first slide. When people are looking for information, where are they going? They're going online, they're going to Google. What information are they getting in those first, 10 results on Google? A lot of it comes from, in this case, animal rights activists. And it's content that, really misrepresents what's actually happening on the farm. And certainly, once they started participating in this conversation, we saw kind of their typical message that goes along with it. So certainly, one of the messages that I saw a few times was, I support putting animal abusers to sleep. One thing that I really find fascinating about, this community is they're very good at preaching compassion. But when it comes to actually having conversations and having a conversation with somebody that maybe challenges their view or their content or things like that, that compassion seems to fly out the window pretty quickly. which really was something that was fascinating me. The bottom right-hand picture, that picture of a calf hutch, is another example that we as an industry do have to be very mindful of. That picture came from a fellow farmer who was posting, like me, posting pictures of what was going on around the farm. In this case, they had put a door on the front of the hutch. It was a cold winter day. They put the doors on to ensure that, the calves, don't come out into the cold, that, they're blocked from the wind and the elements, that they're comfortable in there. The thing with social media is that it's very easy to take a screenshot, to hit, right click any picture and save picture as, and all of a sudden you've lost control of that image. And so, when you are taking pictures around the farm, one of the things that you have to be mindful of, unfortunately, is, how can an activist, misrepresent you with the picture that they take? This is a pretty harmless picture, but as you can see, this individual has written newborns dragged from their mothers, caged in these boxes to prevent muscle, murdered at 6 weeks. A pretty aggressive message, first of all. Second of all, in the dairy industry, murdering calves at 6 weeks is not a good succession plan. We want those animals, to raise in. Certainly we want those heifers to raise into, good, strong, long-lasting cows. We're also veal producers too. We raise veal. They go to 700 pounds. That doesn't happen in 6 weeks. That happens in, many, many months. They're in group pens, but, certainly, when we talk about some of this, activist propaganda, fact doesn't necessarily, get in their way of, talking about what happens in the industry. So it was one lesson early on in realizing that, you couldn't really have a conversation with a lot of these folks because, they'd either that, compassion that they were preaching would kind of wash away fairly quickly, and they would, go on the attack of, other farmers, and certainly, that happened, or in the case of, this other one in the bottom right corner, take advantage of, what may look like, a consumer perception of the industry, but has absolutely no truth behind it, kind of take that and spread and continue to spread the propaganda that just simply isn't true. So pausing again for a minute, obviously, dealing with activists and dealing with activism is something as an industry I think we've probably been uncomfortable with just because it's, new territory. And, when I talk about, an activist going on the attack, it does make you feel uncomfortable when they start making claims and start personally attacking your character, your farm, whatever it is. But the reality is that as producers, the reason we're in the advocacy space, we wouldn't need to be here if it wasn't for, activists that were quite happy just, quite frankly, making stuff up. So when we start to think about, some of the things that activists do, some of their tactics, how can we, really take control of the conversation, part of it is realizing where they come from. So one of the tactics that they're very good at is making their cause seem bigger than it is. Again, it's not necessarily based on, any truth, but they certainly like to, try to make their cause look as big as it is. And that's what we saw in that first couple of weeks of this, conversation online was, they took to their social media channels, rounded up as many activists as they could, and they all at one time, went on to Twitter and other social media tools to, continue to push that propaganda. So when you come to the space, it may look like there's, that all you ever see is animal rights activists, but really what you're seeing is, a handful in Canada, a handful in the US, some in Australia, some in Europe, and then really taking turns to make sure that that conversation was happening 24 hours a day. So I know that, for me and others in the industry, we looked at that and said, wow, there's far more of these activists out there than we thought. But then once you start to narrow down, and certainly, the ones that were personally attacking, myself, my family, my farm, I went ahead and blocked them. I only really needed to block about 12 or 15 of them. And all of a sudden, the conversation turned very positive again because it was really just a very, very loud and aggressive, group of activists. One of their other tactics that they really like to take advantage of is agitate, argue, and aggravate. And this is not necessarily from an activist standpoint. I know, that there are folks out there who choose to eat a vegan diet, and that's, certainly their choice. But when we get into this agitate, argue, and aggravate, part of it's activism, part of it is online trolling. And online trolling is, an issue that, really has garnered more and more media attention as it continues, because there's a group of people, I don't even know if they actually believe in some of the things that they talk about, but they, get their fix, they feed off of trying to wind people up and trying to aggravate people. So you really do have to, when you're in an online space having a conversation, recognize who in this audience that their only goal is to agitate and aggravate you, because, if that's what their aim is to do, not to have a conversation, not to, get anything out of it, just, frankly, to make you mad, it's time to get out of that conversation and ignore them completely. And that was one thing that, I did fairly quickly. And, after a period of time, most of those, kind of gave up trying to aggravate me because they, found pretty quickly that I wasn't going to fall victim to that. The other thing that, to talk specifically from the activist standpoint, and this goes whether it's online or whether it's in public or whatever it is, one of the things that they try to do the most is get an emotional response out of a consumer. And the emotions that they, try to use the most or do use the most are either fear or guilt. Certainly when we talk about animal agriculture, the most common emotion we see from their propaganda is guilt. When we talk about, on the crop side, the grain side, certainly the technology side with, pesticide use or GMOs or things like that, it narrows down to the emotion of fear. And their hope is that by using those two emotions, they can get the consumer to change their habits pretty quickly. And unfortunately, those negative emotions, kind of do sit heavy with a lot of us. When, if I ever get a claim from, a car seat and, that maybe it's not safe, well, all of a sudden, as a parent, I may want to pull that out of the car fairly quickly because I'm scared I might be putting my child in harm's way. The same thing goes when we talk about agriculture. So when we start to see how their marketing goes, it's going after an emotional response within a consumer. So it's one thing that I think we as an industry have to get better at, is how are we going to also get an emotional response out of a consumer? Not a negative one. We certainly don't want that negative emotion. They can keep that to themselves. We want that positive emotional response. How do they feel confident? How do they feel comfortable? How do they feel safe, using our products, or trusting, that we as producers know what we're doing when we are producing food. The other thing that they try to do, very quickly is make it a black and white issue. Certainly the food system, how food is produced, is an incredibly complicated process. There's many systems, many food chains, and their goal is, can they make it basically an answer of right or wrong? I actually, just this morning even got another message from one of my, good activist friends, who was obviously trying to push that when they talked about the emotion of guilt. And it was simply a case of, if you care for animals, you should be, vegan. If you don't care for animals, then you are not a vegan. And, it really was a case of, not addressing the issue of animal care, of how animals are raised or anything like that. Their simple goal was to make it a black and white issue that if you care for animals, you need to be vegan. If you're not vegan, then, simply you don't care for animals. And that's a pretty common tactic that you'll see. So I think, when we start having conversations, if we can get out of that black and white mode that one system is right and one is wrong, I think we'll have a lot more success in these conversations. As I mentioned before, one of their successes that they did have early on was in rallying their troops. They got online and, started to build, their community to make it look, as big as possible. Fortunately, within the industry, a lot of farmers, I see actually quite a few names, here on the participant list, that were part of this that said, this is the reason that we need to advocate. This is the reason that we need to talk about what's going on the farm, because you in the activist community is trying to, basically make up a conversation about, what's happening on farms. And so I think a lot of producers, weren't going to stand for it, and we're going to continue and, even more join the conversation in, what was happening on, their specific operations. And I think that was really positive. Now, that being said, I know that other farmers, did back out of the conversation because of the aggressiveness in that. And, it's certainly not something that I would blame anyone for doing. We got, actually some, pretty wild threats against, our farm, and, some pretty strange comments that, would really get to the best of people. But I think we have to realize that this is the space of online trolling, and this is what they feed off of. We just have to do our best, and this is the reason that we have to take advantage of this conversation. It's one of those important points, and certainly the fact that so many producers came on board to also share their, positive things that were going on their operations certainly, turned this from, a challenging couple of weeks to a really positive, 50 weeks out of this campaign. So just very quickly, dealing with activists on social media, when it's aggressive trolls, especially when they start threatening you, making threats against you or other farmers, there is nothing wrong with ignoring, muting, or blocking. Twitter and other social media tools also have a report mechanism. Do not be afraid to use that. That's what they're for. Twitter is not very good at addressing that trolling issue, but at the same time, once you block them, then it's not something you have to deal with. If you are going to engage with an activist, you really have to be, in a pretty comfortable headspace and really positive, because you have to stay calm. You have to stay very serious and factual. There's no place for sarcasm and humor, because one of the things that they could be doing is trying to get you to say something that they can later use against you or the industry. So do be very careful when you are engaging. You want to stay professional. And when you start to see a trend, or you start to see a trend in conversations or people online, it's not a bad idea to notify your provincial marketing body, industry association. A lot of groups do try to keep at least a little bit of a handle on, what the activist conversation, where it's heading. We all have a role to play in making sure that our industry associations know what's going on. In public, it's one thing that, maybe you go to your local fair, the Royal Winter Fair just wrapped up here in Ontario, Agribition, things like that where the public may come in. You also have to be prepared to deal with activists, because you may not even be expecting them, but you want to know how to handle them. Certainly, the same thing goes when we talk about engaging with them. You have to stay calm. You have to stay serious, factual in your conversations. You do want to bring in context and that emotion that we talked about earlier, but you certainly don't want to, make something up or go on hearsay or anything like that. Keep it very based on what happens on your farm, within your neighborhood, things like that. If you feel threatened, certainly some of these folks, they are determined to get you to change your mind immediately. And if you don't, they can, get quite aggressive. Not necessarily dangerous aggressive, but at the same time, certainly makes you feel uncomfortable in that conversation. Get out of that situation immediately. You're a busy person. You can back out of that conversation and just continue to go about your day. Again, you see that trend happen, at a show or things like that. It's a good idea to notify, any authorities, your provincial industry association, marketing body, whoever that is, so that as an industry, we can kind of keep tabs on what's going on. So moving on from dealing with activists, as we, try to wrap up in the next few minutes, certainly, just an example of what, other producers were taking pictures of. Alex from Manitoulin Island, just simple pictures of what's going on every day. In this case, the milk truck driver, taking a sample from the tank. newborn calves, Ryan out of Montana, taking just scenery. People are, really quite interested in, kind of the beauty of rural Canada and rural North America. They don't get to experience it living in a high rise. And I think we don't want to necessarily, take for granted what we get to experience in this industry. And I think it's, really a good idea to, use that beauty as we have these conversations. Here's another one that, I just find to be, really just an impressive picture at that, pause for just a minute every day and appreciate what we as an industry get to experience on a regular basis. 98% of the population will never get to see a scene like this, even if it is, a cold day in Manitoba. But at the same time, that's just kind of a gorgeous and a great opportunity to really appreciate what we do have. Have an opportunity to talk about some of these tough issues. When we talk about poultry barns and the number of birds that are in some poultry barns, consumers may get turned off of just how many are there. But when we start talking about why are birds kept in barns, they're well lit, they're clean, all of a sudden a consumer can pretty quickly, kind of come to the table and start to understand what's happening. If they hear from an activist that there's, several thousand birds in a barn, and then get the activists, kind of misconception about why they're in that, the consumer may be turned off of the industry. If we come to the table and are quite open about it to say, here's what the barn looks like, here's why it's like that, then I think for the most part, a consumer is going to understand that, a January day or a hot July day is no place for, a bird to necessarily be. They don't necessarily want to be in that. Here's the facility that they are raised in. And certainly, as I said before, we were fortunate enough to have kind of that, experience from producers all over the world, including, Jenny in the U.S., who's been fantastic over the last year at posting things that are going on around her operation. And I think, that's one of the big things that we as an industry need to get on board with is all of us together, not just here in Ontario, not just across Canada, but globally, need to be part of this food conversation. Because if we're not part of this food conversation, then these activists are quite willing to stand in our place and, preach from their pedestal. We'd much rather sit down at the table, have a conversation with them, and it's going to take producers around the world, to be doing something like that. Very quickly, here was one message from an organic dairy farmer in BC, another great one who, has a lot of pictures on a pretty regular basis about their operation. One of the messages she got back that I, find fascinating from a consumer is, you'll see partway through that is, so I wanted to tell you how grateful I am for this, for your time and education, and how excited I am to be finally learning through the source instead of organizations like PETA. I'm just worried about how they, the vegans, could shut down the dialogue. So I think consumers understand when they see stuff from a PETA or a Mercy for Animals or an HSUS or whatever that group is. I think most of them understand that it is just that. It's propaganda. But at the same time, if that's all they ever hear, how are we going to ever expect them to think any differently? So I think as an industry, we really have to take advantage of a consumer that, is smart enough to know that this is propaganda, but we have to take responsibility for the fact that they're interested in the information, and if we don't provide it for them, somebody else is going to. Just quickly, here was another quote that I got directly. I've been buying beef and eating butter under a cloud of guilt for too long. As I said before, the emotion that these groups are trying to use is guilt and fear, and those can be, pretty aggressive emotions, on your conscience. All of us have felt, guilt at one time or another, and it's exhausting. If it's that exhausting, you go about and you change your habits to try to get rid of it. I think, we as an industry have to be at that table to say, that guilt you're feeling isn't based on fact. It's based on, a misconception. It's based on complete fiction and fabrication, whatever the case may be. Here's what is happening on my farm, on other farms, within the neighborhood. The food system that we have, especially here in North America, is a very safe one, and the consumer should feel confidence in it. We just have to be there to provide that confidence. A couple areas that I've seen and I've heard that this Farm 365 campaign has been used, whether it be my content or other content from the hundreds, the thousands of other farmers globally who are using that hashtag. We've seen a lot of classrooms that open up these pictures and give an idea to young students who have no experience in agriculture, are giving them an idea of what is happening in real time, on farms, in their neighborhood or around the world. We've seen Twitter conversations and even Skype conversations between a farmer, in a classroom. Certainly, it's challenging for us as producers, to go into the city and have a conversation with multiple farmers. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to, take advantage of the technology and the smart boards that are in classrooms and have some Skype conversations. We could sit down, if one producer sat down for an afternoon and talked to a different class every half hour for 2 or 3 hours, we'd hit a lot of students. And I think that's one thing that we as an industry, can take a look at. Just quickly, as certainly, we hit the end, please feel free to ask your questions and comments. I know Brent's going to come on in a minute to, maybe ask some of these, or I'll flip through these and read these. Here's some of the pictures that I've seen. How much does a cow milk? These are our milking units that measure milk. How much does a cow milk is a question people get. A cool day outside, how do you keep calves warm? You put coats on them. Not necessarily something that a consumer would think of. What's the role of fertilizer in crop production? There's that negative connotation of what nitrogen does to the soil, but the reality is if you're growing a plant, just like anything else, it needs to be fed. And, what's the role of fertilizer in that? What are some of the processes that you go through in an annual basis? And then, as I said before, maybe you're not comfortable in the social media space. Is there an opportunity? Maybe you've been in a classroom setting where the teacher or professor has said something that you don't necessarily agree with. I think a lot of us just get mad and leave the class and say that teacher doesn't know what they're talking about. We have to start standing up and, going to that teacher, going to that professor and saying, let's have a conversation about this because I have some different feelings and some different facts on what you're talking about. How can we address this, on a one-to-one level so that going forward, they've got some more factual information. Have you ever thought of taking advantage and volunteering at a booth at your local fair, at any show? That can be a great opportunity to have some conversations with consumers. As I said before, going into, some of the big shows like the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto, you're going to get questions from consumers. Are we as an industry doing a good enough job at preparing, the young people to be able to address those issues? I think we, have to start taking real advantage of those people who are in the stalls. And then, take a look at some of the issues that consumers have asked. These are just some of the questions that I've gotten and other farmers have gotten. Whether they're based on fact, whether they're based on fiction, doesn't matter in a consumer's mind. What matters is they're curious about that, and we, as an industry, we as individual farmers, as individual people within the sector, have to know what is, what our answers are going to be for this, and what are the pros and cons of using, any one of these systems. We have to be prepared to answer even those tough questions. So that basically does it for, my formal remarks. I see a couple of questions that I'll get to. We'll probably do this for about 10 more minutes, so please do take advantage of the question and comment section to ask your question. I see a question here from Cheryl. What would you do differently if you were to do it again, if anything? That's a good question, and I think it probably depends a little bit on the tool. Certainly I've enjoyed using Twitter as a social media tool, right from the get-go. Probably, early on, realizing that not everybody is on Twitter. Since then, I've posted, all the pictures onto Instagram. I'm in the process of putting all of the photos on Facebook as well. I think if I was doing it differently, I'd probably come up with a little bit more of a broader social media plan in terms of what networks was I going to use, how was I going to use them, things like that. The other thing that I think I would do differently, it's still a challenge every day, is the pictures are really powerful, don't get me wrong, but I've found the text you use, the comments you use, what your quote is to go along with a picture can be even more powerful than the picture itself. So I think, especially early on, I probably would put, as much focus into what I was writing as I, did in the pictures early on. Another question here is, how did you stay calm and manage the conversations while farming? Quite honestly, I didn't always stay calm throughout those first couple of weeks. It was really important that in the social media space, I was calm because, there were, consumers that were really interested in that. Classrooms, kindergarten classrooms that, you have to be careful of the conversations when that there's half a dozen kindergarten classes watching what you're saying on a regular basis. Fortunately, I'm really grateful for the, team we have at home, mom and dad, my wife, kids, grandparents, all of that. They took control of some of the, day-to-day chores in those first couple of weeks as I went through, responding to some of these questions. So it's one of those things that, you don't necessarily have to stay calm. You just have to make sure that, that message that you're, when you are talking to the consumer, you are calm doing it. So, it's kind of, something that you just have to be very, very mindful of.
Andrew, if I can jump in here,
Yeah.
how do you know when you're getting baited? So, it's one thing to stay calm. It's another thing to kind of see, how do you sniff out whether something's coming, that it really is about to be a genuine conversation and positive and something you want to participate in, or whether it's a setup to kind of get you hooked. I'm sure many people who want to say positive things are worried about getting caught in the trap.
So certainly one of the first things I do when I, see that question that you're suspicious might be baiting, I just simply go to their profile. What types of things have they tweeted before? If all they've ever tweeted before is that, kind of constant vegan propaganda, that animal rights propaganda, then chances are they are baiting you because, obviously all of their conversations prior to that, have been, pretty negative. So that's, kind of step one. But at the same time, some of those questions that you think are baiting are genuine conversations. So, you kind of get into that, and I've been in a few of those where you do get into that conversation, and you go back and forth a little bit. But, if there's, and sometimes the conversation turns out, quite positive with them understanding. Sometimes the conversation, ends with you probably agreeing to disagree because, they're interested and they're fascinated, but they're not necessarily convinced based on just that conversation. And then other times you'll get into it and it goes south pretty fast, and that's a pretty good opportunity to, in my case, I've got cows to feed, I've got cows to milk, I've got land to work. I can kind of, get into that conversation and say, I appreciate the comments. We're not going to agree on this clearly. Have a great day. I'm going back to work. So, we can't be afraid to say that either, because the reality is we're all, we all have jobs in agriculture. We're all on the farm. We're busy people. We can't spend 24/7, responding to these. So, take advantage when you have time, and, when you don't, then, use it as your reason that you're not answering the question. So.
Andrew, there's an interesting question here about what maybe our children are hearing that we don't necessarily hear, that whether it's intended to or not has a slant, and how do we kind of keep track of what the message is in some of these other channels, not just on Twitter and social media?
Well, I think a lot of it just comes down to, when you're doing homework with your kids, when you're, having that conversation about what you learned in school, as an example, and you hear something that, doesn't really, hit right, then it's probably a good opportunity to, ask your ask your kids for a little bit more information on it. What did they learn? What was the conversation? And then, as I said before about, talking with a teacher or professor, maybe your child is comfortable having that conversation depending on how old they are and how knowledgeable they are on the subject. Maybe it's a position for you as a parent to, step in and get involved. Call up the teacher and say, I heard that you were, having a conversation on this subject. I, as a concerned parent, would love to hear more information. This isn't a place where you go to that teacher and say, how could you possibly be so stupid as to, talk about something like that? You know exactly where that conversation is going to go, because they're going to close up and assume, you're kind of a jerk, even if that is, maybe what you have in the back of your mind. So it's one of those where, you come to it from, kind of a conversation standpoint. You want to learn from each other on them, have that conversation. Certainly, if we get into an area where they're talking a lot of propaganda, I heard one story of one teacher who, every class that she had before noon, she would ask the children what they'd have in their lunches, and if it was any meat product, she'd take it away because she said that that wasn't appropriate to have. That's an area where, obviously the teacher has some pretty strong beliefs, and it's probably a good time to get the administration involved. And that's what I know a parent did, and that stopped because obviously there's no place, in the schools for a teacher to have that kind of control over, what's in a lunch based on, their personal beliefs.
There's an interesting question here. You certainly have the farmer perspective. There's many in the industry also connected to agriculture that feel an interest in supporting not just farmers but the whole industry. What's the role of non-farmers, or how do those messages complement the farmers' message? Even those who belong with and work for corporations that sometimes are taking it on the chin. How do we mix those messages all together in a positive string?
Yeah, you're right, Brett. They do take it on the chin, unfortunately, and they're there's a lot of good people in a lot of those companies that do take it on the chin and are kind of happy to and have those conversations. I think when we talk to consumers, the challenge that the industry has is kind of that preconceived notion in the consumer's mind about what it is to work for a corporation and be involved in, some of these, big seed and chemical companies. So it's a challenge that way. Whereas I think going into a conversation, a consumer has more trust in the farmer, just because, when you use the term farmer, they, kind of all of a sudden think, kind of that really positive side of what agriculture is. So I think as an industry, there's an enormous role to play in certainly terms of, having these conversations when you're given the opportunity to, especially having these conversations where, if you work for a big chemical company, using the idea that, okay, in anyone's case, I'm a parent, I have young kids, I have a family, I want the best for them as well. Here's why I think this is the best for them. And all of a sudden you start to, give the consumer a better idea that, it's not a, faceless corporation. There are real people involved who, really strongly believe in the work they do. I think the other thing is, from an industry standpoint is, how can you as an industry support the producer, or support some of these producer ag education groups, because going right into the conversation, they're the ones that hold the credibility right off the bat. So, but as a producer, I'm really knowledgeable on dairy production. I'm pretty knowledgeable on grain production, but I still might get a question about eggs or beef hormones or anything like that. I need the support from some of those in the industry that have the information that then I can use in conversations going forward.
And I guess we've had some discussion about your experience about the kind of the conversation that social media has. In how many places do we start the conversation rather than just react to it, or where beyond blogging and social media do we need to be even stronger in the voice of what's positive? How do those pieces fit together?
I think the biggest thing is you do what you're comfortable with. Part of the reason that I think I've been successful with taking these photos every day around the farm is because I enjoy taking photos every day around the farm. If I wanted to do something else, if I wanted to go visit a school every day in 2015, I'd fail at that pretty quickly because I maybe don't have the time, maybe they're too far away, whatever that is. So it really comes down to, I think we're going to find the most success if we can, just do what we're passionate about in the first place. We're in the industry because we're passionate. Why not advocate in areas, whether that be in social media, whether that be in letters to the editor, dealing with the media, talking to classrooms, whatever that is, if you're passionate about it, you're going to be better at that. So I think that's where you need to focus on.
Andrew, we've kind of come up to the top of the hour here as we had planned. I'm curious if you have a couple of last wrap-up comments, including from your years of experience. What's next? What do you do next year? Does 2016 have a whole new strategy, or a continuation of what you're up to, or you have a unique skill set and a passion for this? Where does that take you next?
Well, that's a great question, Brent, that I just haven't quite answered myself. It's just been one of those things that I've just been starting to get that question. When I decided to take a picture every day in 2015, it was like December the 28th. So it wasn't there, even if I had it in the back of my mind, there wasn't a whole lot of, big planning going into it. Certainly I want to plan out 2016 maybe a little bit better, but, certainly I still like taking pictures around the farm. I'm still going to be taking pictures around the farm. Is it going to be every day in 2016? Maybe, probably not every single day, but probably most days. But certainly I think, I do want to look into other areas of social media. How can we as an industry be more effective? And I think, one thing that I'd like to see and like to be a part of is how can, we get more involved, whether it be, with us producers and Ag More Than Ever and the Farm and Food Cares of the world, and all the companies and all the associations, how can we, get a better collective voice going? And I think that that's where all of us in the industry have a role to play. And I hope that, you do visit Ag More Than Ever, today or another day you have time, and go through some of those resources, because I think we need to be on the same page, and we all need to be, really taking this conversation back and, claiming it as ours, because it is our story. It's a great positive story that we have to share. We just have to go ahead and share it. So,
thank you very much, Andrew. I'm glancing over the notes that I've been rapidly scribbling here because I've been enjoying all of this. I certainly appreciate your perspective on how you believe there are many that are consumers that are just genuinely interested, and there's a vacuum to fill about what we can say and how we can say it, and a relatively small number that are disingenuous. And we need to manage both of those strategies with an understanding a small group shouldn't upset the balance of what many consumers are just fundamentally interested in what's going on. And that interest isn't necessarily always what the TPP is. It might be, hey, where do calves come from? How old are they when they walk? That the things that we might take for granted are special to other people who may be listening and watching and want to have some fundamental understanding. So we shouldn't take that. We shouldn't just say, oh, they're not interested in the regular things that we do. It may be the regular things that they do that we're most interested in. Your comment about the press,
absolutely right.
Your comment about the press and that you build a relationship. When you become the go-to person for them, they're going to ask you about questions that are hard sometimes. I certainly appreciated you thinking about, if it's a question that's too complicated for you to answer, maybe the only obligation you have is to direct them to somebody that you think can give them a good answer. It's unreasonable to believe that we are the source of all knowledge for all questions that a reporter might have. but it's not unreasonable to direct them responsibly. You know, and there's some great ideas about managing trollers and not letting them get under your skin. They're a relatively small number. We all appreciate the vision and the initiative that you've started, and I think all of us can learn something from that and maybe have a little more courage ourselves to be one of those advocates to step out and to support what we love and believe in as well. Thank you for your time and your energy. Thank you for all those who participated in this this webinar today. They all join me in thanking you